Hi everyone, Susan with the Sacramento History Museum here today for this Museum Monday, where we're kind of looking around at some of the architecture in Old Sacramento, and we're seeing things that remind us of other things. I like to call it the copy and paste on some of these buildings that we're going to see. So I will say it's super windy today. It's kind of busy in Old Sacramento. We've got the highway right behind us, so if you can't hear me, I'll try and speak up, but we will be moving around as well. So I've got my microphone on, but just FYI, it's just really windy as well. So behind me here is the B.F. Hastings building. It's a beautiful building. It is currently used as the visitor center, which is run by the Sacramento History Museum, and that's about all that's in there. There's some offices in there as well. Now, if we could go back in time to the 1850s, or about 170 years ago, this building was an epicenter for activity. There was so much going on here. The top floor, you can see the sign, it says the Supreme Court, and that's true. The Supreme Court was on the top part of the B.F. Hastings building. It was also obviously the B.F. Hastings Bank. It was the Wells Fargo. It was the end of the Pony Express. I'm actually standing in front of a Pony Express statue right now, and there's a reason why it's looking at the Hastings building. It had the Alta California Telegraph that was in it. So it was really just this kind of bustling place for a lot of business and activity. So over time, though, the buildings in Old Sacramento, they changed. Now, Old Sacramento sits right on the Sacramento River, and in the 1870s, it also became kind of the focal point for the railroad for a lot of reasons. And so this was like the business part of the city, which is why it was so important to the gold rush. As time went on, though, after the 1850s, into the 1860s, into the 1870s, Sacramento started to grow. And so the city moved eastward away from just the water and toward more space. And that's when this area kind of changed a lot. So in the 1950s, about 100 years after the majority of these buildings were originally built and had businesses in them, there was a big reconstruction restoration effort in Sacramento. So we're going to walk to one of these buildings that is a good example of this effort, but I want you to get a really good look at B.F. Hastings. Okay, we have just a ton of information about the Hastings building and what happened to it in the 1960s and 70s and how it got restored back to what it looks like today. And it's a pretty faithful restoration to what it looked like in the 1850s when it was built. And we've got actually, since there's no one walking right now, I'll just show you right now. We have an architectural report. This was done in June 1970. It includes a lot of these like blueprints, right? It's thorough. It's got a lot of information about how this building needs to be restored. And it's also got excerpts from different newspapers from the 1850s about what it looked like. So there's tons of primary documents and accounts of what this building really was. So when they needed to restore it, they were able to do it really faithfully to what it looked like from the time. Okay, so let's walk. And as I'm walking, I'm just going to walk one block here. And as I'm walking, I'll kind of tell you a little bit more about the reconstruction efforts in the 1950s. So a lot of people think that this area, which at the time was known as Skid Row, really fell into disrepair because of the Great Depression and then World War II, and I mean, that's true. However, the whole West End, which is the area from the Capitol to the river essentially, and this was more Skid Row area, started really to decline in the 1870s, 1880s, because like I said earlier, this is really the epicenter for business, the Embarcadero, the trains and everything. But at that time, the trains actually, like the depot moved into the filled slough, and the kind of business area started to move more west. And not just that, but in the 1850s, a lot of the business owners down here, they used to just live above their buildings. Well, as they made more money and whatnot, they built homes, and they built homes further away from here. And so this area already started to kind of go into disrepair. Even in the 1800s, the water travel that the river was so important for wasn't as important, because now we had trains and now we had, just better ways of transportation and whatnot. And so even though, yes, when the Great Depression hit and the businesses down here just really suffered and it became Skid Row, all of that started long before, the Depression and the war. Now, in the 1950s, there was a big effort to kind of help downtown, revitalize downtown Sacramento, because we're the capital of California and, we needed that. So, there was a lot of phases. I'm like trying hard to think about how to summarize this. There was a lot of phases of development, let's say. And a big part of it started to be like the development of not just like tearing it all down and rebuilding things, but looking at it from a historical preservation point of view. Oh, it was a horn. Okay, I was like, that sounded like a ship. What was that? And so if you look at the district here as a historical preservation point of view, you start to see the facades of buildings that had gone into disrepair, had been changed over and over and over again. And if you peel back some of those all you have the history underneath them. And so that's what the commissions and the housing development areas and all sorts of different departments started to think about in the 1950s. And it would take decades before Old Sacramento as we know it would be Old Sacramento. Let's move a little further this way. It's kind of a busy corner. The other thing that was happening at this time was a huge movement for more, even better transportation. And so what's behind me here that causes a lot of this congestion is the highway. And there was so much conversations and whatnot on where that highway could go, where I-5 and even I-80 could go in Sacramento. And a lot of people here, come on just a little bit further, wanted it to go on the other side of the river in Yolo County. And there's some obvious reasons for that. This wasn't always a highway. These were businesses, these were houses. People lived here and people were displaced because of the highway being put there. And Yolo County at the time, or the area over there, just had less of that. However, there's a lot of fears that if it got put over there, then people wouldn't stop in downtown Sacramento. So it would be really difficult for the economy to be revitalized and to have that if we didn't put the road there. So I'm glossing over a lot of this. This is a huge conversation, and please feel free to comment and give us conversations on that. I think this could be its own Museum Monday series. It's just the revitalization. But the building behind us here is the Democratic State Journal, and I want you guys to take a look at that. And I want you to see how much of a faithful reconstruction this is, or restoration I should say this is, of the building that was here when they started doing these surveys and talking about restoring the building. So here's the picture of what it looked like. As you can see, a beautiful, perfect restoration. Just kidding. What happened here? Look at this picture. It doesn't look anything like that. What it looks like is the B.F. Hastings building. It looks exactly like the B.F. Hastings building. We've got the copy and paste right here. It's our copycat. You've even got the stairway. Okay, so what happened? Right? All right, so in the 1950s, all this is going on. They're starting to figure out where to put the highway and what to do with the buildings that are down here. And they decided to do, I think the tagline was the past for the future, or preserving the past for the future. And it wasn't just about, making these buildings back into what they were in the gold rush in the 1850s and the 1860s, but also making sure that they had a use. And so it wasn't just like the facades. They actually were buildings that could have businesses in them. Well, what would you do if you had this? If you had decided finally that you're going to restore these couple of blocks here to the 1850s to the 1870s facades. And what would you do if you had this much information? Pages and pages and pages of information on a building, and then you have another building where you've got nothing. You don't really know what it looked like in the 1850s to the 1870s. You know what it looked like at the time, which this is a very nice picture, but it was, like most of the buildings down here, it was falling apart. It was having it needed restoration. And so what I was able to find, and if anyone's interested in this, I would love to do more research on that. I tried to do a lot and I just ran into some dead ends here. But I found this one page on like what was going on, or the survey of this building from that time. And literally what it says is that this used to house the Democratic State Journal. It was only for about 3 years, but still. They moved in 1855. I think it was built in 1852. And it was followed by the FW Frat and various other occupants. So it had a lot of different occupants, which makes it hard too to, okay, well, do we restore it to this or to that? And they just go back to the beginning. Who had it first? With several significant alterations, present building completely reconstructed in the 1960s. Now, I saw this picture in one of these reports, which was what it was looking like, and it said something like in the middle of restoration. And I have to say I disagree with what that said, because the B.F. Hastings building was restored. That was essentially what it looked like, and it was restored to what it looked like in the 1850s. This was not. This is a reconstruction of a totally different building, right? And so I think it's important to understand these differences when we're talking about the revitalization, all these R words, of old Sacramento. You've got reconstruction like this, and you've got restorations of buildings like the B.F. Hastings. And so I don't know exactly why this one was chosen to be a reconstruction of the B.F. Hastings building. I have ideas, I have guesses. And I think a lot of it is, okay, well, we do have a lot of information on these. This is another corner building, just like the B.F. Hastings is. And we want it to kind of match the other buildings. And this might have been what it looked like. We're using the other buildings around here to, inform us on what it could have looked like in the 1850s. But we don't know for sure. And maybe we will, though, someday. We're always unearthing more documents and more things about what it possibly could have looked like. So, to kind of end it with you today, I find these kind of projects amazing, because the restoration and the reconstruction of old Sacramento, like I said, it took decades and decades, and it has a lot of controversies to this day on whether it was done correctly, whether that highway should actually be there, just a lot of different things. Whether it even should have been restored to the 1850s to 1870s as opposed to, the 1900s or whatever. And now that this started in the 1950s, the building started to be reconstructed in the 1960s and finished in the 1970s, we actually have another 50 or 60 years that we can look back on, 50 or 60 years of hindsight here. And when they started this project, they had about 100 years. And so we're actually getting closer to that number again, where they had a huge revitalization effort. And I don't know, I just think that's really interesting, what the next 30 years will bring, or what will happen in the next 50 or 100 years. And now that we've had this 2020, all the different ideas and interpretations of what this area could be. So next time you're in Old Sacramento, take a look at some of these buildings and kind of picture, okay, yes, I see that I'm supposed to be transported back into the earliest of Sacramento history, 1850s to 1870s. But, what are we missing? Or what is it missing? What are we enjoying here? And then which buildings look like a copycat of a building that has just been restored? So next week, we're going to look at one of the buildings that is, I think it's the oldest building actually in Old Sacramento. I'm not going to tell you what it is. And which also underwent a restoration process, but is one of the only buildings that was able to stand throughout all of Sacramento's history. So please join us again next week and join us in this conversation. Thank you.